Professor Kulke, I just wanted to ask you about if you could tell us something about your initial experiences and the motivations that led you to your study of Orissa. How did you move into Orissa as a region for study? What interested you about Orissa and what led you into that area?
It has a long prehistory. I did my PhD on Chidambaram in Tamil Nadu. I studied Sanskrit, Indology. The text was the Chidambaram Mahatmya, which was the initiation, so to feel for a Tirtha, importance for question of state formation, although at that time I was an Indologist, although my major subject was always history. We colleagues, friends of mine, students, we wanted to continue to have initially some small project on a pilgrimage center, because a pilgrimage study of tirthas, etc., has not yet come to the field of classical Indology in Germany. I'm afraid I was really the first one. Some classical Indologists were not very much in favor of that time. So we wanted to have an even more important Tirtha, and Jagannath, the Lord of the World, was our first choice when we finally decided to do something. Initially we wanted to have a study on Lingavaj, comparing a Shaiva Tirtha and a Vaishnava Tirtha, and there's a famous German book by an Indologist. He was the only who took care of that. Indische Tempelstädte, Indian temple cities. Number one was Puri. This is something like that influenced us, but when we came to Odisha in 70, still thinking of having a comparison, it was obvious, either or, but not both. And that was a right decision. My major field was, since I am a historian, I studied also political science in the second minor subject. What was the importance of the great temple cities, Lingavaj, Jagannath, Puri and Konarak, for the growth of the regional state, of processes of regional state formation. And in this context it is perhaps the best example to show the influence, since we also have these three stages. We may later on perhaps talk about that, Lingavaj, Jagannath, Konarak. It's a continuous rise, and the empire was also rising at that time in a way. That is not the complete answer, but I hope it's one answer which brought us, the Germans, because I was part of a German Research Council sponsored project, which in a way, I hope it's not too much what I'm claiming. It came out of my first PhD study, because all of a sudden people were interested, and of course the question is why not we continued it in Tamil Nadu. But the problem was that we realized to learn Tamil is for Sanskrit scholars more difficult than Odia or going on what I learned Hindustani. It was not Hindi. Anyhow, that's long ago. So once we had been in Orissa, there was no way out to get out. We didn't want. We continued, and we had a big other project. The first one was clearly on Jagannath called Puri. The Shasan villages, the Brahmin temples outside. The second one from 1999 to 2005 was then to look to the hinterland. What did Jagannath, the cult of Jagannath, the temple cities mean for state formation as a whole in Orissa, but all, and that was turned out to be equally important. Let's call it sub-regional identities. The many wonderful, the many feudatory states, Gajat is a better name for them, and their cultural identities, tribal influences, etc. So we have now, enlarged our interest. I am personally also very much interested in Indian Ocean studies. And the question, just yesterday I had a discussion with one still MPhil student from JNU, art history, influence of Orissa. It's not easy to trace it because I'm always blaming the Brahmins, lazy fellows not writing about the maritime trade. The question is why? We cannot explain it. Because obviously Kalinga did play a role, but there is not a single mention of anything in the great inscriptions of the Gajapatis. There's only one in Banpur, South Orissa, Samudra Karabanda, which is a toll station, you may call it, that's all. Samudra, the word, does not exist any longer. Why? I am afraid it has something to do because the sailors were low caste, if not outcasts. They were not taken care. It didn't fit into the political ideology of the great king. But this is mere guesswork, I don't know. Anyhow, I hope this explains why I came to Orissa and why I continue to love Orissa and the studies in Orissa.
Thank you very much for that, sir. One point which I'm drawing from what you just mentioned to us, your entry into Puri and then looking outwards into the hinterland, as it were, of the Garjat states of Orissa. Could you tell us about how you experience the linkages between the Garjat states and the core area in Puri, particularly through the medium of the Ishta Devatas, the local deities, the Thakuranis, and so on. That you've written extensively about that. Love to hear something about how you conceptualize this link.
Thank you very much for this question, because that was really one of my motivations, so to say, to continue, because number one, the question is, the answer is very clear. Many, not to say most, of the ex-feudatory states did have, or still do have, Jagannath temples. Some of them quite excellent buildings, like in Ranpur, more or less central, but also at the, let's say, where the former tribal region started. And I was interested, while doing research on the Jagannath cult and its impact on the central Gajapati kingship. Of course, I was traveling in the hinterland, and when we came there, I had no idea that there were so many temples in the hinterland. But two things were very clear. These temples came up only in the 17th, mostly 18th, 19th, even early 20th century. It was required as an additional legitimation of the rising feudatory states, which a process which was not did not come to an end. On the contrary, more under the British period. They wanted them to be quiet, let them have their rituals, etc. But this is now most important. While traveling in the hinterland, I realized much more important than the imported, you can really say the imported Jagannath cult to the hinterland, where the original indigenous tribal deities, which you just mentioned, Thakuranis. You may call them Ashtamatrikas, which are of course well known from classical Purana literature, but in Orissa they are all former tribal deities, all ladies, of course. Many important. Stambeshwar is perhaps the easiest to mention, because it is clear the pillar which is there known in the hinterland, present day, it's still very important in the Genkanal culture region, but already at 500 AD, more or less exactly 500 AD, an anonymous king called himself Stambeshwari Bhakta, worshipper of Stambeshwari. And but while traveling in the hinterland, it was fascinating to see the amount of powerful, initially obviously also dangerous deities, whether Mani Nageshwari in Vanpur or Charchika in Banki. At least 4 or 5 of them are still very prominently dominating, more or less. Jagannath, yes, it's there, but the real the official tutelary deity is Jagannath in most cases, but the real powerful deity are these Thakuranis, and they are known in a way, but no one really took care of us historians, and that is a great, in a way, discovery, and what that meant for state formation. Perhaps later on we can talk in the context of state formation.
Professor Kulke, can you tell us as to what is that made you shift from Indology to the study of state formation?
Initially I studied German language. I wanted to become a teacher or something. I didn't know anything else useful for our society. It was German, but my major field was always history. And Indology slowly crept in my second, third term, because I studied really early medieval German history. You know, there was Charlemagne about 800, very powerful, so to say, our Ashoka, much later than your Ashoka, obviously. While studying intensively problems of state formation, also we have our tribals, different tribals, Stämme they are called, how they were brought together under Charlemagne the Great, who is buried in Aachen, is important, absolutely important, but 2 generations after him the empire collapsed, and the tribe, not the tribals but Stämme, which were organized already, early little kingdoms you may call, powerful kingdoms, till finally the Saxonians took it over. And this process of coming up, going down, all of a sudden reading of course about Indian history, since I started already slowly, first Hindi, then Sanskrit, just as a minor subject, moving in to shift over from German early medieval to early medieval India. And I liked it very much, because that was then my field, not the field of my German colleagues working. So I enjoyed it, and I continued very much. I hope this is the answer to your question, or can I say anything else, please?
No, the related question would be that what were the initial influences in your moving into the idea of state formation?
State formation, since I am not just a historian, but with a strong sociological and political interest. Because we, in Germany also, we had our great theories. You had primarily the colonial theory, however it is to be explained, and of course feudalism also. I was more interested in processes of state formation, how it really worked, what were the local, the sub-regional processes, and we can define it in Germany also. There we have the Christian Church, but this was not completely, but very different. That was a central organization in Rome and the great Erzbischöfe, bishops. In India, it was, you had the general idea, the Brahman idea, but the fascinating thing was here the local authorities, the real independent states, which depended to a large extent on the, how to say, convergence of Brahmanical kinship ideology and real tribal, post-tribal religion. It was, how to say, it was more fascinating to do my early medieval studies here. And of course, behind all that was our interest in the Jagannath cult, because that dominated. I did my, as I mentioned, my PhD on Chidambaram on a real Sanskrit text. We have to write a DLit. It's called habilitation before we want to continue somehow going on to higher offices as a research assistant. That was on Gajapati kingship. I did it is hopefully I will be able to translate it. It's in German still, and yeah, that. But that I realized when I wrote it. That is only one part of it. The other part is in the hinterland. The influence which Jagannath Puri had in the hinterland, and yeah, the rising of this feudatory, no, not feudatory. I'm hesitating to call them all tribal because they have become partly Hinduized before they were finally integrated into the pantheon, so to say, of deities, mostly Thakuranis, ladies, of course, in the context of yeah, our beloved little kings, what they did. Their legitimation was for their own dominion, more contact with the tribals. But they wanted to marry their daughters to some outside colleagues. And there the question, what do they have Brahmins? Is there Hinduism already existing? Otherwise they can't. So the competition between these, when Orissa or India became independent, were altogether 24 feudatory states. And they had to, there was a strong competition, which is higher Mayovansh, Keonjhar or something, and this depended, of course, primarily of their engagements with Brahmins. But their dominion was not based on that, because for them it was much more important how they treat, if I may say this, the indigenous Thakuranis, which were the major deities of the people. It was not Jagannath. This has changed in recent decades very much because of the mobility of the villagers coming to Keonjhar. Keonjhar is very familiar, Ranpur very familiar to me in this sense. People are easier to go. There were no buses in olden times. Now they have their own mobiles.
So modern technology has in fact facilitated the integration of the Jagannath cult. Would you say that?
In a way, yes. Of course, the first great step to Jagannath's rise to a not imperial but all Indian deity. The Indians, the Oriya claim that has always been the case. That's not true. In the south, next to no influence Jagannath. But to make a real step forward was, of course, a train. There was initially only the train already, I think in the 70s, Calcutta, Chennai, Madras. And in the 90s from Koda,
the highway. The highway, no?
The highway, no, or the train. The train, and that made Jagannath a much greater, open a much greater dimension for influencing. Before that, I mean, we have many awful reports on the pilgrimage walking on foot. Many died on the way to Jagannath or on the way back. Horrifying stories, of course, by the Britishers are known. They may not be completely correct, but one also has to say the British were very much interested in keeping alive the Jagannath cult, doing that was good for them ruling Odisha. You have written about that. You know more about than I.
The model that you put up, the integrative model, how is it different from segmentation and fragmentation?
That's a question which I may not be able to answer fully, because as you know, we both owe quite a lot, I would say much, to both theories. I started with this state formation problems reading R. Sharma's Indian feudalism, because there's a small chapter where he deals very detailed the origin process. That was an initiation for me. At the same time, when the project went further on, and my research also, Bertenstein segmentary state turned up, which was really important for me, really what is in Tamil Nadu the Nadus. The economic independent rural regions, always under the control of some, let's call it landlord, and some more together, some institution which he didn't define correctly, what it really meant. Initially, or from the very beginning, I was hesitant what he writes about the segmentation of the Chola Empire. What he's writing does have a meaning for early state formation. Also, Subbaralayu, a famous South Indian, says yes, for the pre-Raja Rajeshwara, the great imperial period, it has some value. Bertenstein's mistake, if I may say, but he wanted to write it. Once I thoroughly discussed it. Why have you used the segmentary state? Also for the imperial Chola period, because the segmentary state is clearly, there is, in the center they have a monopoly, the Cholas, in Chola Mandala, but even only not in complete Chola Mandala, only around somewhere. But this real actual political control and power, dominion, vanishes to us already in the medium center, and it's not any longer there in the outer center. What makes the state is only political sovereignty. Political sovereignty, that means, yeah, they are acknowledging the center, but not meaning the actual political power was not out beyond their center. And that is difficult to say, and particularly to explain the Raja Rajeshwara temple as just as a mean of more or less, generally speaking, a weak person who needs it. Anyhow, that was, but again, I learned from looking really to the local institutions, which are not so clearly defined in Odisha as in Tamil Nadu, in the Chola Empire. R.S. Sharma was, for me, the first scholar who really pointed out the importance of a donation to Brahmins. No one took care. Of course, they have to survive, to live. Okay, fine. But what that meant politically. But he, and again, I learned a lot from him. I had many discussions with him, and somehow he was not really against my, how to say, not objection, but since I wrote once an article, segmentation versus fragmentation or integration in 92, 94 in the Journal of the JNU, which points clearly out Sharma, that's great, R. Sharma was not offended. But, after having written this, my otherwise still existing till his death, very personal relationship with Bertenstein didn't like it, because segmentation, finally there is nothing left which makes an empire, and the Chola Empire, if we talk about empire in the pre-Mughal period, even Delhi Sultanate, it was an empire. Anyhow, that But I, in contrary to R.S. Sharma, I regard the donation to Brahmin villages, it was not a loss of dominion. Somehow they lost some income, obviously. But it was never so much that it really was, the kings were not poor. They survived very well. It was most important for them also, so to say, to compete with their great colleagues, the other great medieval kingdoms, which had their temples. Brahmins, no Hindu kingdom without having a direct relation with Brahmins. That was just as we all need universities. Why the taxpayer, the Indians and the German taxpayers have so invest so much in people like us? It is something which is required. So in contrast to R. Sharma, I regard the donation and the treatment of Brahmins not a loss of dominion, but on the contrary, the increase. It was the importance. In a way, this is the background how we then came up with our integrative model of processual state formation, because integration, I should insist of, so to say, talking on integration, because all what we do see in the processes of state formation in early medieval is integration. That doesn't mean that there was not contestation and also appropriation of ritual, political and economic. Professor B.D. Chattopadhyaya, once I had a discussion about he said, my impression is too idealistic. You also should think the integration of tribal deities is also sometimes an appropriation. Anyhow, the greatness of Indian early medieval state formation is the integration of local and sub-regional cultural processes, linguistically, culturally, art and architecture. It's not totally different from what we experience in Europe. Again, there's a relationship. So this integration to our model, the integrative model of processual state formation. Processual also, that is important, because neither Bertenstein nor R. Sharma are looking for processes of development. R. Sharma does it later, as I pointed out in one article, and Bertenstein also. But the impact of their books is Indian feudalism. That is the most important one. There is no progress, there's no development. Development in a negative point, losing dominion because giving much away, which is, it was there, and Bertenstein, the fragmentation, segmentation did not allow really, he regards segmentation as a major process of the fall of the Chola Empire. It came back for some time and in the Vijayanagara Empire, but there was a great conference in Heidelberg long ago in which many people attended, also Bertenstein. There he was willing to, and that was a great discovery, or we were surprised. He did not any longer talk about segmentation under Vijayanagara. We congratulated him, perhaps too much, because later on he said, no, it is segmentation also. But again, I must say, without these two great scholars, we would not stand there where we are now. They allowed, it's also always very important to not only to have people whom you like to quote because you somehow agree, but people with whom you can contest, discuss, in a good way, because as one German scholar driven away by the Nazis to London said, progress of research is not verification, but falsification. Verification means repeating more or less it's all correct what my forefathers, intellectual scholarly forefathers had said. No. Falsification means to come up with new ideas and also saying this is perhaps not correct, we have to develop it further. And so to say, our basis for our integrative model is in double way dependent on these people.
Professor Kulke, I have one more thing to ask you. You see, all of us know you have also worked on Southeast Asia. Now, your study of Southeast Asia, in what ways has helped you understand Indian history that much more or better?
Yeah, in a way it is somehow an extension of my experience from German medieval, Indian medieval, now Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia, of course, is well known, has come under strong Indian influences. But again, I often say Hindu colonies and Greater India did not exist. What the great, otherwise real great Bengali historian Asi Majumdar pointed out, and it's a pity that even after his death his books were republished, where he talks clearly that there was no real culture to be worth to be mentioned in Southeast Asia. It was all brought en bloc from India to the still barbarian inhabitants. That was, yeah, it was a bit too much, but of course that was part of the Indian national movement. I won't call it nationalism, independent movement. He wrote that in 43, I think, for the first time. But I can't understand why such nonsense was republished in the mid-60s when he was still alive. But now, coming to Southeast Asia, I fully understand when Tagore visited Southeast Asia, he also felt this is Indian. But he didn't translate it into nationalistic thing. The greatness of going there is really Borobudur, or Borobudur more than Angkor. Angkor is something much greater. But Borobudur reminds one truly of the Pala sculpture, art, but there's not a single piece of Borobudur-like stupa in India. So it is Southeast Asia on its own, and but the development of state formation is quite near and can to some extent be compared what was going on in South India. South India, Sangam age, it was not the age of the direct Brahmanical influence. That came only later. And we know, of course, that the Brahmins have been invited. And in the same way, the Indian influence to Southeast Asia was what we call now the agency, it's the correct word, was in this process Southeast Asian. They invited. And we know from several early inscriptions in Indonesia, particularly in Indonesia, but also on the Malay Peninsula, they were invited. And in inscription it is mentioned the land has been donated to Brahmins Iha Agata, who came. And most likely from India, but on the other hand, people say no, they are also invited, for instance, to Java from Malay, where we know they have already been a bit earlier. Doesn't matter. The point is, come back to your question, state formation, it is comparable. It is, you learn once, because in a way, some of the Javanese, Indonesian, also in syllabus, what is called previously, describe this process more clearly than in Tamil Nadu or Orissa. Orissa, there were no Brahmins in the Ashokan period. Perhaps there were some, but they didn't play any significant role. I mean, the Rajguru of Kirunja, one Madan Mohan Mishra, I know him very well. I hope he's still alive, definitely, but his health creates problems to him. Yeah, I mean, he is very proud that his forefathers, I think, anyhow, in early 19th century, came from Jajpur. Jajpur is a very important, also political center in early medieval Orissa, and the Jajpur Brahmins are proud to have come directly from Aryavata, or what it is, Madhya. Yes, from the center of Brahmins in North India. It is more or less likely they did come. Whether all of them, that's another point. But what I mean to say, also his forefathers were invited because they were Brahmins of a very high level from Jajpur to Kirunja. Temple has built for her very recently, but in 74 it was just in the forest. That there was their real Thakurani, the tutelary deity, but kept outside because these also dangerous, important, the Rajas didn't want to have next to their palace. They had their Chalanti Pratima or Utsava Pratima brass images of there. But the original was just a stone. Just a stone. The Chalanti Pratima was Durga. So this is, so to say, the process of state formation which made it, for me, very much and jointly for us, why Orissa in this sense is an ideal arena for such a kind of studies. I don't know a place which is more, how to say, more profitable for us to study. Others are there, of course, but similar studies are now done also by some people here in Delhi on the Assam region. What was going on there? We don't know yet very much about process of state formation, because this was, of course, Assam, Ahom, Shan, it's all, a Thai-like, which came only in the 9th, 10th century to that. Anyhow, process of to come back, what I was saying, for us, for our model, it's important to show there were a process of state formation, going up, down, and finally, mostly one dynasty ended up. A new dynasty had to create similar basis to take over. But that was not just falling from heaven, they had to do something. And these were processes which can be studied. If you ask, if you need to have a question, do you want to show a model, or do you want to look with our model, or however we call it, to look for processes? The interesting, fascinating thing for both of us is the processes of state formation. It's a continuous process.
Can I ask you, sorry, Bhairavi, just in continuation of that, in that case, could you just quickly give two thoughts on how you would compare the Gajapati kingship of Odisha and the Devaraja kingship of Angkor?
One process is definitely the background, the real indigenous background of Jagannath. It is from the country. And Anantavarma Chodaganga, when he dedicated the temple to it, he remained throughout his life a Shaiva. Why has he done it? Obviously it was important. Now the Devaraja cult is in a way comparable to the period of the Kodavajas. The Kodavajas from the, but again only end of 18th century, called themselves, or were called, praised as Thakur Rajas. Thakur is Deva. Devavajas. But I remember when once I asked in our first project the late Rajguru, a Wesen scholar, great scholar who worked very much, contributed to our studies.
Satyanarayan Rajguru. SN Rajguru.
Not alive in the 70s. I think you are right.
Satyanarayan Rajguru.
Satyanarayan Rajguru. When I asked him, also comparing Southeast Asia and Germany, Orissa, he didn't laugh, but he didn't like the name Thakuraja. He said, there's nothing, it is not. Please don't tell it to the Raja of Koda, because they are still somehow, anyhow. Now in Angkor, it is based on a imported religion, ideology, which became very much their own. The Devavaja cult is based on Puranic tradition and everything on coming from India. But it was changed very much. It is an Angkor, Cambodian idea, or you may call it ideology, which was important, how to say, therefore once it became a real and imperial, you have Angkor Wat and even Bayong, much larger or comparable certainly to Lingavaj, but much more Jagannath and Konarak. It is, but we know it was also because of the influence of a, it is often called eine religious dynasty. The priests which established this cult was coming of a Brahmin from Janapada, that means Orissa, India, and to maintain it was their interest and the king's. And I mean, it is a question, of course, which I may not be able to answer now, why these temple mountains came up there. There is definitely some background in the, if one cannot call it any longer tribal, in the pre-Indian or slightly Indianized kingdoms of the around 500, 400, 600, 700. There were these pyramid-like step pyramid, where in the center you had the central lingam, which, and that was a long discussion whether this is the Devavaja or was the Devavaja, the first lingam which was established 802. We have a long inscription referring to this, but that is on a mountain, Mahendragiri. The earlier one was a Linga Parvata. You see around 500. We have for the first time. But what I mean to say, the first great lingam, which was established in 800, remained there. It cannot be moved. So this is now, we need not to discuss it at details. The problem, what was the Lingaraj and the Devaraja. And because of my experience in Bhubaneswar, where you have a Linga, obviously a famous Linga temple with a very powerful and very heavy stone in which he is not taken out. During the Bhubaneswar Hatha Yatra in April, Chalanti Patima is taken out, put on the Ratha. So my idea is the same thing happened, but that doesn't change the idea of the Devavaja cult. It existed, and in this sense, I won't say that it was directly influenced by by Puri. My Odishan friend would be happy if I say it.